Holy crap, do I love Bleach. Warts and all, I love this dumb, drawn-out drama about death gods, monsters, intergenerational trauma, perseverance in crisis, the resilience of love, and the teeth-gritting desire to make the world better, even if you have to bleed and die to do it. I love its big dumb battles, I love its unga-bungas, sad boy macho men, I love how dark and serious it is, I love the clothes, I love how it will give us quiet moments to breathe amidst the chaos. I love that it values trust and friendship instead of definitively saying you need to be an alpha dog that does it all alone. Sure, it has plenty of flaws. Power creep, excessive fan service, and a bloated and occasionally tedious back half that just will not appropriately deal with any of the grown-up concepts it splashes around in, but I love it still. And most of all, I love chapters 341 through 354, henceforth referred to as the Lust chapters. They are, for my money, the best Bleach has ever been! Also, I say manga, and I'm sorry if that upsets you, but I'm also not going to pretend that I say it any differently if I'm gonna be yammering on about it for like an hour and 20 minutes. I don't know, leave me angry comments, whatever, up my engagement. Wait, what is Bleach again? If you weren't a total frickin' weeb like myself when you were 12, here's the SparkNotes rundown of 340 chapters of build-up. Bleach is a manga created by Kubo running from 2001 to 2016. It was one of the big three, the ever-present titans of the manga space back in the day. You couldn't shake a stick without seeing figurines, posters, t-shirts, YouTube compilations, all that jazz. Shelves at Barnes & Noble were consumed with the iconic white spine and blazing title. Even now, years after its peak popularity, it still landed a new anime for the last arc, even though the original anime ended 10 years previously. Bleach follows Ichigo Kurosaki, a teen with the ability to see ghosts. People often mistake him for a delinquent because he gets into fights, but listen, I'm gonna die on this hill. He's not a delinquent. He's a preppy jock that vigilante fistfights bullies and thugs and makes friends with everyone he lays eyes on. Because, as he's quick to tell you, he is one who protects. That's gonna be important later. Ichigo is voluntold to become a Soul Reaper, aka Shinigami, in order to protect people from hollows. Hollows are the monsters of this world, corrupted souls that prey on the living and the dead. Although Shinigami can engage in some really harrowing fights with hollows, ultimately, their task of defeating them is noble. When a hollow is cut down by a Shinigami's blade, they don't die. Rather, they are exorcised and sent to live a happy, normal afterlife. A lot of fighting and friendship happens as Ichigo learns the ropes, and there's also a shocking amount of murder, angst, and conspiracy along the way. All of these people are important. I'm only going to talk about 4. We'll unpack the rest as we go. Bleach is one of the big mamas of the manga space, never mind the shonen battle mangasphere, and for good reason. Its target audience is early to late teens, which is bonkers when you remember mild body horror is a staple of its being. And it's predictably fun, fast-paced, full of cool boy stuff like swords and anime protag hair and blood and titties. But it also excels at discussing incredibly complicated topics. Depression, trauma, loss, friendship, sacrifice, betrayal, and the coping mechanisms we use to quite literally battle our inner demons are all major themes. Granted, they aren't always developed to satisfaction for the more mature members of the audience, and some of the more compelling plotlines are dropped in favor of a few simpler, more eye-catching ones. But I'm willing to give it a pass. It's opening up conversations and, however subtly, addressing the character's suffering in a way that isn't just petty teen angst. There's a whole extended metaphor about stuffing down depression to keep others happy and how that manifests as a continual downpouring of rain. Are you kidding me? The first arc of the story is the usual stock and standard. Ichigo explores the new parameters of his role as a Shinigami, strengthens his powers, and inevitably develops a group of friends that will ride with him through the end of the story. We even dig up a bit about Ichigo's childhood trauma and learn about the death of his mother, Misaki. When he was a child, she was killed by a hollow. When he was a child, he found the first person that he could not protect. It is a triumph when he defeats the hollow that killed her. He is stronger, steadier on his feet, more prepared to take on the dangers that face him. With every new development, with every character he meets and trial he faces, Ichigo is getting better. The best in the area, more able to take on everything that faces him. Or so we think. Rukia, the Shinigami that has been helping him this whole time, has committed a horrible taboo by giving him the powers that allows him to keep everyone safe. She will now be taken back to the Soul Society for judgment, and ultimately, to be executed for her crimes. Ichigo can't save her. All that training he has done, all of that winning, all of that catharsis he has felt is gone. He can't stop her from being taken away, but he will bring her back. He will protect. Cue the shonen typical battles full of machismo, violence, inexplicable level-ups, and the power of conviction and friendship. It's fun, occasionally silly, intense, and fairly predictable in format. Fight a dude, learn something integral, move on. Fight a dude, learn something integral, move on. Except around the edges, you have a murder subplot, a conspiracy subplot, Ichigo kinda starting to lose his soul. That's weird, wonder what that's about. Rukia resigning herself to death in an act of misplaced guilt for the death of her mentor and friend, and oh yeah, you're watching 15-year-olds fight for their lives against seasoned warriors trying to murder them for attempting to save their friend. Yes, they need therapy, and no, they do not get it! But in all seriousness, Bleach's story is complicated. Beneath all the glitz, gore, and glam, there are some very serious questions being asked, and the main characters have to come up with answers on the fly while also in combat. And that's not just me stepping back and taking a mature reading of this. Tight Kubo periodically takes you by the face and says, "This situation is whack, and we just have to do our best to deal with it." The subsequent Hueco Mundo arc takes everything we learned from the Soul Society and lets it marinate and grow. While the Soul Society arc took place over the course of a few days at best, our main characters have matured substantially, which is kind of what happens when you make child soldiers, and yes, I will be hanging a lantern on the fact that that is literally what's happening in Bleach, but we don't have time to deal with it. Either way, they have learned more about the cost of sacrifice, their own personal limits, the things they will do for their friends, and the horrors that reside in the world of the dead. It is this understanding that they take into the arrancar arc, which allows all of those themes and ideas to be cranked up to 11. While the Soul Society arc was focused on adjusting to the big leagues and finding inner strength in times of adversity, arrancar distills the themes of inner strength into one of inner balance. It has been made clear to us so far that everyone has both the pure and the profane within them, be they human, Shinigami, or hollow. The only way to succeed is by not letting one overrule the other. Vizards and arrancar. Bleach talks a lot about balance. Like, a lot about balance. Balance in yourself, balance in relationships, balance in information, balance in the world. It's incredibly apparent when you look at our two main supernatural forces, Shinigami and hollows. Shinigami are obviously the positive force. They are the protectors, the healers, the magic weavers. And while Kubo magnificently complicates that narrative by exploring the inner workings of an archaic, bureaucratic system that is content to rest on its hegemonic laurels and slide horrible, horrible people into positions of power, the functions and goals of Shinigami are good. They are there to protect people from literal mindless monsters that cause endless suffering and death because of their insatiable hunger. They are there, at least ostensibly, to help the hollows pass on to a better, more peaceful life. Hollows are the destructive force in the world. They are liars, deceivers, destroyers. Granted, some moments remind us that hollows are merely deeply traumatized human souls trying to fill the void inside of them. And we see some souls that aren't bad just because they're hollows, and they choose to be nobler than their base instincts. But on the whole, they don't have the dignity or luxury of higher thought. They are hollow. They are hunger. they are in pain. These are human souls that have decayed into a monstrous state, and everything here is equal. Cosmically, the world is balanced. And then we meet the vizards. The idea of vizards is introduced pretty early on in an incredibly sneaky move that you're probably going to forget by the time it becomes relevant. Ichigo may be ridiculously powerful before he goes to save Rukia, but it's raw, untested, and more importantly, unrefined. He's going to need a lot more to accomplish his goal, so our resident ominous vendor that knows a bit too much offers Ichigo a little boost. And it's fine, this is just part of the training. Don't worry about it, I'm sure it'll be fine. Listen to me? It will not be fine. When this idea shows its face in full, both we the audience and Ichigo the main character get to freak out about it and wonder, holy crap, what is going on? It's scary to us because we don't understand what's happening, and it violates everything we do understand. Shinigami and Hollow are supposed to be opposites. This is not how things are supposed to work. A vizard is a Shinigami that has undergone the process of hollowification. Functionally, they infected themselves with a hollow soul and then internally defeated that hollow to gain its powers. And although every single vizard we have seen to date has been an unknowing victim that has undergone an excruciating, life-threatening process, they are still regarded as criminals. To those ruling the Soul Society, a taboo is a taboo, and these people require punishment. They are now the villains, and it is more reasonable to ostracize or execute these criminals than to offer them sympathy or understanding for what has occurred. It's pragmatic in its cold-bloodedness. If they survive the incredibly dangerous process of hollowification, the vizards come out the other side faster, stronger, and more durable than a normal Shinigami. They are better warriors for having embraced the powers of a hollow, but as we see with Ichigo, they are in constant contention with their hollow selves. If they slip up even for a moment, if they become even the least bit overwhelmed, well, as Ichigo's hollow self proclaims, if Ichigo's control slips just a little bit, he'll kill Ichigo and wrest control. Should this ability fall into the wrong hands, yes, it can make impossibly strong, impossibly dangerous enemies that could turn into uncontrollable rage monsters at any time. If you are a xenophobic, culturally elitist, militaristic governing force with a history of exterminating your problems, yeah, destroying the vizards seems like a foregone conclusion. The only reason that Ichigo is able to squeak by unscathed is that his existence happens to coincide with a centuries-long conspiracy being unearthed, and he just so happens to be the only one strong enough, brash enough, and arguably disposable enough to deal with it. But Ichigo doesn't really care about all of that. He's just concerned about saving his friends and how he's gonna handle the schoolyard rumble he's about to go through. And yeah, this is the thing that allows him the exponential growth to survive that. It also nearly consumes his soul and turns him into a barbaric, savage monster in the process. It isn't really addressed much after the fact because Ichigo is an incredibly resilient dude and deeply emotionally repressed, and he seems to have it more or less under control, and really we have bigger, more pressing narrative matters to deal with. But that doesn't change the fact. Calling this a traumatic experience is, well, it's a bit of an understatement. Ichigo doesn't understand what has happened to him at this point. He's just a 15-year-old kid thrown into a war zone, and now he has to look his worst self in the eye, and it scares him. It haunts him, and it nearly consumes him. Ichigo literally has to battle his inner demons, and the longer it takes, the less conviction he shows, the more ground he loses, the less of a grip he has on his body. If he fails, he will turn into a complete monster. Again. And I hate to tell you this, friends, but he almost does. It's often framed as though Ichigo is lacking discipline, or, more annoyingly, intelligence, like he's just this dummy that can't resist hitting the turn into a hollow button. But even if we set aside that Ichigo is an adolescent given virtually no preparation or context to deal with these problems, and he's a total newbie who's trauma learning expert level techniques because his life has become a war, and the fact that he has some really, really bad teachers 90% of the time. Maybe Ichigo doesn't really want to do all that it takes to defeat demons. Not that he's too soft or that he's too weak or whatever dumb machismo BS you want to try and call it, but maybe Ichigo doesn't want to have to violently defeat, or worse, kill his enemies with this great and fearsome power he's unlocked. No matter who he has faced so far, no matter their announced intentions of killing him violently and horribly, he doesn't want to kill them. He doesn't want to hurt them. He would like his enemies to step aside because he just wants to save his friend. And now his opponent is him. Theoretically, it should be easy. It should not be difficult to take up arms against this dark, monstrous version of yourself. But at the same time, that's still you. It feels more personal, more painful, more frightening than everything that has come before. Ichigo doesn't want to kill this part of himself. He doesn't want anyone to die. For as compelling as the tragedy of the Vizards is, that is not all. Balance is integral to the world of Bleach, and so we must have an opposing force rise to meet them. And they do, in the form of arrancar. Arrancar are hollows that have removed part of their masks, gaining not only a human form, but the ability to be faster, stronger, more durable. They are the utter opposite of vizards. Hollows that have been given a touch of the divine instead of shinigami that have been tainted by the depraved. While vizards are seen as abominations, chased out of society and left to fend for themselves, arrancar are regarded as evolutions, improvements on the hungering beasts we've seen so far. They are the elite, the rulers of hollows. Hueco mundo, the land of the hollows, is a... Okay, I know this is the word for it, but that's a bit much even for me. Okay, I can do this. New take. No, stop. I also use a semicolon. Duh. Hueco mundo, the land of the hollows, is a critocracy. Anyone strong enough to take power is in power, and very conveniently, the 10 most powerful have that status branded on their skin. These are the espada, revered and feared by all other hollows. This system is admittedly complicated by the bad guy coming in and doing just a teensy bit of colonialism, but the result is much the same. The espada are the god kings that rule over the vast desert of the dead and dole out whatever crooked justice they choose. We aren't shown the exact process by which an arrancar removes their mask. We catch glimpses, of course, possibly because it's about as complicated as ripping off a scab, but from the little that we do see, these aren't ignorant victims forced into the transformation. These are people that deliberately choose to remove their mask. It's definitely a stretch to say they have support when they take on this endeavor, considering the nature of hollows, but there's something validating about people you know watching you undergo this transformation. Maybe they're waiting to see if you fail, but they will also acknowledge your accomplishment. A far cry from transforming scared and confused in the woods or in some pit, choking on your own mask. And while the arrancar show nothing but contempt for the shinigami, they are similar down to their spiritual anatomy. They contain the same pressure points, the same fragmentation of their souls into zanpakuto, even the same method of releasing their abilities into first one, and then two forms. While vizards and arrancar are fundamentally opposite, they are still inherently similar. They have only come into existence because they took elements of the other side and brought them into harmony. Too far into any one direction, and they will fall out of sync and become non-functional. The one exception, of course, is Ichigo. Ichigo doesn't really have harmony. I mean, sure, he does it in the end, manages to bridle the darkness running around in his soul, but that is something accomplished sheerly through brute force. After all, there is a big difference between wrestling your demons to the ground and actually putting them to rest so they no longer try to kill you. And it's telling, I think, that Ichigo admits that his internal world, the space where his zanpakuto and hollow self reside, is inaccessible through the normal means of meditation. He cannot go there of his own volition, cannot begin the work to grow and resolve his fears from a place of considerate peace. He has to be forced there, one way or another. It works, for now, but after a certain point, violence always stops working. Aggression stops working. In the back of Ichigo's mind, there's always that fear of, what if? What if he has a lapse in strength? What if he loses focus? What if things fall out of balance because I don't know how to do things without violence? What happens in Hueco Mundo then? Everybody kisses and makes up after the Soul Society arc, only for the arrancar to show up and do some hardcore paradigm shifting. They beat some incredibly powerful Shinigami and steal Orihime, one of the friends of the group. The gang, being good Nakama, decide they need to go into the land of the Hollows to get her back. Hueco Mundo, the land of the monstrous dead. I'm skipping a lot, like a lot, but this is when the arrancar arc really starts to step things up. The beauty and nuance of the world is coming more into focus, and the characters are becoming more aware that this is a world defined by tragedy. They've been to the land of the dead before, but here, the land is dead. It's a vast desert where nothing grows, nothing flourishes. It's just endless, heartless night and an ocean of sand. No wonder the people here are bloodthirsty and cruel. Survival must be a cold, hard thing. As we wander further into the Palace of Las Noches, we start to see more of arrancar society. Granted, it's still a world of terrible people doing terrible things, but we start to see more of the social order and the personal dynamics between the arrancar. They are monsters, but they are also people. There's a surprising bit of nuance amongst the Espada and their followers, personal philosophies that people nurture, relationships they protect, worldviews they will fight and die to uphold. And I'll admit, some of it is very, very tedious. Shut up, Zamari, you dumb pumpkin. And there isn't the level of development that the Soul Society gets, but it's important that we know they have friends, followers, likes, dislikes, grudges, codes of honor, family. Fighting the Espada exposes our heroes to a lot of nightmarish things, but there are still moments of nobility and compassion that make me pause. You are fighting monsters, and they will fight as monsters. But that doesn't mean they have lost their soul completely. At the end of the day, they are still traumatized souls defined by their lack. Many of them have said they want better. They want trust and companionship and to live anywhere other than a world soaked in blood. But they don't have a choice. They are trapped in a culture, a mentality, a state of being that is defined by desperate hunger and pain and fear. And yes, while the whole hungry hollows thing makes it a literal dog-eat-dog world, it's not something the Espada expressly want. Several of them say they regret the world they live in. They don't want to constantly fight to survive. They don't want to lick Aizen's boots because he's the strongest. I don't talk about him a lot, but I want to hit him with sticks. I hate that guy. Some of them just want to be left in peace. Some of them want connection. Some of them want friends. But this arc isn't solely about them. Our heroes are still here, and while they must overcome the external adversaries blocking the path to Orihime, they must still address their inner demons. With every step they take deeper into this land of eternal night, they must battle their own fear, selfishness, doubt, ignorance, and rage. This arc is filled with the punchy fighty bits that Bleach is so well known for, but they are paired with the same fairly complicated moral quandaries as before. We may be confident that the good guys are always going to take the good guy option, but that option becomes increasingly murky. Do I kill this enemy and prevent them from returning later, or do I keep that part of my morals intact? Do I revive my trauma? Do I take the shortcut? Do I abandon the deadweight? Do I compromise myself in order to survive? These are people I'm fighting, not just grotesque, strange beings. So, do I treat them as people, or as a fiend that needs to die? Sure, a Shinigami Zanpakuto purifies hollows and sends them to the Soul Society to live, but does that count if they bleed out instead of receive a killing blow? Does it count if you use magic or one of your special moves to defeat them? Is purifying them and moving forward down your path worth the violent, bloody, extended conflict that still looks and feels and hurts like you are fighting to the death? Moreover, not everyone on the team has a zanpakuto. They are just beating their enemies into submission, and if they die forever. Is this worth it? Is saving Orihime worth butchering a literal palace worth of enemies, some of whom don't even want to fight you? Sometimes the answer is easy. You know what you have to do the moment the question is asked. Sometimes you're less certain and you don't have time to think about it until later. And sometimes you don't really have a choice at all. You just have to live with the consequences. All of that brings us, finally, to the Lust chapters. It is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of the entire story. This is the last battle of import within Hueco Mundo. Arguably the last battle of import for a long time. Ichigo is so close. He has Orihime within his grasp. They can all return home safely if he can just defeat the arc's primary antagonist, ulquiorra. Just one more obstacle. How bad can it be? The princess, the hero, the dark horse, the monster. For all of its bombast and production, Bleach is ultimately a character drama. Tight Kubo has a very deft ear for characters and personal conflicts, and can make you care about some random side character over the course of just a few chapters. Usually it's through ritualized trauma dumping on their opponent for the day, and you know, if you vibe with that method of storytelling, you're gonna have a good time feeling things with this absurdly large cast whenever they go fisticuffs. But the main characters get a more subtle treatment. Their stories being woven over hundreds of chapters, until you're not just watching two dudes punch it out until the audience is sated. The conflicts start to feel fundamental to the characters involved. They literally could not be anywhere else and have it make sense. These conflicts are inevitable, no matter how badly you wish that weren't the case. First up, we have my girl Orihime. She is a literal princess, and I love her, and I will fight to the death to defend her. Fandom historically hasn't been kind to Orihime. She's a ditzy, highly feminine character in a story that just reeks of testosterone, and it can be easy to write her off as an annoying waste of space or an excuse for a fan service waifu, there to gas Ichigo up and solidify the otaku power fantasy. But that's so demonstrably untrue, and also pretty sexist, especially in this arc. Orihime is kind of an odd duck in the lineup. She's one of a handful of characters that aren't really combat-oriented, but keeps finding herself in the middle of the drama anyway. She's a support character, focused on healing, defense, and encouraging others when they lag behind. She'll cheer you from the sidelines, she'll talk to you when you're having a bad day, she'll share her food when you're busy training, she'll always be by your side. To interpret Orihime as simply a hot damsel for the boys to rescue, or to write her off as deadweight because she lacks the aggression of all the other battle wife girl bosses on screen, is a gross mistake. Orihime, despite her goofy personality, is an incredibly proactive character that makes bold choices whenever given the opportunity. She is choosing to bolster, save, or protect other characters. She will always throw herself down to help others no matter who they are, no matter the obstacles in her way, no matter the cost to her person. Her kindness isn't foolishness or naivete either. It's a willful, deliberate choice to be compassionate no matter what. She rescued Rukia in the Soul Society even though they were just acquaintances. She healed enemy Shinigami on the battlefield because she didn't want people to hurt. She offered compassion to multiple antagonistic arrancar. She threw out her arms to greet her hollow brother with a hug because she knew that he, too, must be suffering. Orihime is the epitome of you will never know how hard it was to become this soft, and I love her for it. I love that she fights against the bitterness and the cynicism and the pain in her world by continuing to be light and compassionate and kind. She is a nurturer, and Honestly, she made 13-year-old me notice that we idolize a whole lot of warriors in a world that could stand for a whole lot of healing. But for all of Orihime's strengths, she still doesn't quite fit. The story is well aware that Orihime doesn't belong. Orihime is aware that she doesn't belong. She may be an excellent support character, but again, support can only go so far on a battlefield. She has no killer instinct, no desire or ability to genuinely harm others, and although she is constantly ready to help, the narrative steadily outpaces her fighting ability. She may be infinitely more capable than the average human, but she's not dealing with average humans. She's dealing with gods and monsters. After a certain point, she can no longer hold her own, and the benefit she offers by defending or healing other people starts to be outmatched by the vulnerability she poses. People start having to take up her slack, turning her into little more than a very valuable target, and she hates this. She hates not being able to hold her own, hates that she can't be independent, hates that she is not able to do the glorious and mighty things she wants to do. Orihime explicitly trains to prevent this, to become stronger, to become worthy of being a main character in a battle manga, but when compared to people who have been shot out of an XP cannon, no. Incremental steps won't really cut it. So, Orihime fights the one way she can, with her heart. I said earlier that Orihime was kidnapped by arrancar, and that's true after a fashion. She was coerced into going to a place she did not want to go, but ultimately, it was her choice. After seeing the rampant destruction that just a few arrancar caused, she decided that she would do whatever it took to stop the things she cared about from being destroyed. She was always willing to put herself in danger to save others. Now it's trading herself away, condemning herself to a lifetime of imprisonment and exploitation to keep those she loves safe. It's easy to criticize the narrative for this. She's making a foolish sacrifice that won't ultimately change anything, and she is still functionally a damsel. Princess Peach quite literally whisked away to a monster's castle. But the point remains. Orihime made this choice. She made the sacrifice because on the off chance that it would save even one person, she would take it. And that is noble. She's 15, and she is saying that she would rather die than risk someone else's life. Even when Orihime is trapped in Las Noches, even when she's held hostage by these horrific beings, she continues to show her trademark compassion. Even when faced with monsters, even when threatened with violence and misery and endless suffering, she shows compassion and understanding and bravery. Maybe words won't work instead of swords, maybe these creatures are too far gone to be reached, but gosh, it's noble that she tried. The tragedy is that Orihime's sacrifice doesn't even work. Her friends follow her into hueco mundo, and although she was trying to protect them, save them, they are now suffering for her. They are suffering because of her. It doesn't matter that she would do the same for them, without question, happily, and lovingly. It doesn't matter that they would do this for anyone in their group, anyone they know, because that's just the kind of loyal, good idiots they are. All she can see is the bloodshed, the destruction reaped, the suffering and corruption sown. Yet again, she is the weakest link, the only person the arrancar could have threatened into obeying, the only one everyone would have to come save. The lives of her friends, the soul of the man she really, genuinely loves, they're all on the line because she was not strong enough to make them stay away. She's happy they came, of course. She's happy that they care. But she's also heartsick that even in the end, she wasn't strong enough to keep them safe, to make them stay away. Ichigo, our stud of a bud, has had a bit of a time since this arc began. Sure, there was that spooky hollow self business going on, but he was riding high after the Soul Society arc. Then the arrancar came, kicked down his door, and used him as a boot brush. That's not too strange. The last few months for him have been a battle training gauntlet. Same circus, different clowns. And at a glance, it's fine. He has come more into balance with himself, just like he needed. He is stronger and a little more cunning than before. He's more aware of the danger he and his friends face. He's even managed to stop his hollow self from taking over. He is the hero of this story. He doesn't need to be saved. And yet, Ichigo isn't dumb. He knows the threat hueco mundo poses against his soul. Much as he is trying to resist, he can feel himself slipping. As his hollow form told him, the more power he takes, the more he tries to force himself, the stronger his hollow half becomes. And sure, that's no different from before, but now Ichigo is having to admit that maybe he didn't know himself half so well as he thought. You can only go through so many life or death battles before you have to admit you kind of like this power. You like winning. You like the high of it, the thrill of fighting, the sincerity of going all out against a worthy opponent, and when you just keep getting better and better, you get stronger and stronger, and you can do more and take more, and break someone down to their most intrinsic motivation, just to see who can leave it all on the floor, who can be better, and you're only 15, and you've got the power of a god, and you don't want to stop. Well, that's kind of a dangerous road to walk down. He doesn't want to hurt people. I don't think Ichigo ever wanted to hurt people. But he's having to admit that he can't not hurt people while also engaging in what is functionally mortal combat. This arc, really this entire story, is about Ichigo coming to terms with his own relationship to power, success, and winning every battle that matters, and how these things cost him. The part of Ichigo that makes Bleach good, entertaining fiction is the part that is no longer suited to normal society. As the story so boldly, ruthlessly names him, he is now a jugulator, a killer with a blade, if in spirit and not yet in deed. He has the heart of a murderer, just as he was told over and over and over, and at the end of this, he is going to have to go home to his family and friends and attend school and play sports and pretend to be normal and know in his heart that he likes fighting. He likes the adrenaline of drawing blood. He's 15, and he has a taste for blood. But he cannot stop. He can't think about what happens now, because now he has to fight for his life, for Orihime's life, for his friends' lives. He's the strongest among them, after all. And even if they fail, he will be there, has to be there, to protect them. And that's becoming a harder and harder feat to accomplish. The Espada are not the people he battled back in the Soul Society that have clear codes of honor and dictate the rules of engagement. They are monsters. Oh, are they monsters? And ulquiorra is a threat Ichigo understands in particular because he's had to learn that firsthand. Or fourth hand, if you want to be more precise. But he can't stop. He can't stop. He cannot stop. Even when ulquiorra starts to get really upset and decides to prove just how useless fighting him is, Ichigo has to keep going. And it's not some egregious, heroic bit of arrogance. If he leaves, Orihime will be forfeit, and all of this suffering they have been through up to this point will be for nothing. If he leaves, he will just have to do it all over again when the villains inevitably come to conquer his home. If he leaves, he will once more be faced with a good woman he was not able to protect. Ichigo, as he tells us from the first, is one who protects. So yes, he keeps on because he must protect. Ichigo doesn't think he can't lose. He knows that he cannot afford to. So yes, he will run the risk and keep running it until he accomplishes his goal. He is the hero of this story. He doesn't need to be saved. Ishida is a latecomer to this battle, as well as the dark horse of the group. He's fairly closed off and a bit prickly. It's because of his terrible father. But he is loyal and chivalrous to a fault. Ishida is the first real foil presented to Ichigo, counter to him in seemingly all things. He's quiet, calculating, and truly arrogant compared to Ichigo's more blunt, hard-earned confidence. He also is the first person to truly challenge Ichigo's beliefs, to question his actions and demand Ichigo come to terms with the legacy he upholds. While Ichigo's foils quickly become dime a dozen, Ishida maintains the singular accomplishment of being truly independent of him. Despite their proximity, Ishida alone can resist Ichigo's narrative inertia. It's difficult to notice at first, considering they tend to have similar goals and end up in similar places, but these are conclusions that both come to separately without ever really interacting with each other. Usually, Ishida is running a parallel side quest to whatever Ichigo is up to, and they might intersect occasionally, but ultimately, they're on their own journey until they reach their own goals. It may seem odd at first glance, but it's incredibly, tragically fitting. Ishida, though getting a lot of screen time, doesn't really belong in this story. Whereas Orihime is different by temperament, he is different by blood. He is not Shinigami, not hollow, not even human. He is a Quincy, the thematic outlier of this tale. Quincy do not fit in the binary of Shinigami and hollow, 1 because that's not what bi means, and 2 because they don't purify hollows like Shinigami do. They kill them. They destroy human souls, upsetting the balance we've come to expect, which the Shinigami, defined by organization, control, and militarism as they are, could not allow. Ishida is not merely an outlier, he's practically a lone survivor. Outside of his direct family, there are no Quincy left. The Shinigami saw to that. This tragic, tainted legacy is constantly hanging over Ishida's head. He is the last Quincy. He has to prove himself, has to uphold the family honor, has to be a good example, the best example, because he is the only one that survives. If he fails, he has ruined all that has come before. This is a complex, I should note, caused by his terrible father. And while this baggage does initially put him at odds with Ichigo, they eventually reconcile their differences and become friends. Even so, Ishida is never quite able to get rid of the personal competition he has with Ichigo. Constantly seems to be measuring himself up against our magical best boy, pushing himself harder and harder and harder to be the best because of his terrible father. I hate Ryuken so much, oh my gosh! It's a pretty classic story about rivals where only one thinks they're competing, the other is just having fun. Ichigo thinks Ishida's a bit weird, but he likes him nonetheless. He respects him, he wants to hang out with him, he's such a preppy jock that has adopted this weird little sewing nerd, but the entire time, Ishida is here, however distantly, aching to prove that he is better. And despite all of that, Ishida also learns to step outside of his family legacy and do things for himself. During the Soul Society arc, he might have pretended that he was there to fight Shinigami rather than help save Rukia, but here there is no pretense. His sole obligation is to help save Orihime, and while that's true of everyone that ventures into Hueco Mundo, it feels a little bit more pointed coming from him. His self-proclaimed purpose is to uphold the legacy of a slaughtered dynasty, but instead, here he is, prioritizing his friends and personal honor over a flawed, family-imposed worldview. And during Ichigo's last fight with Ulquiorra, I think it's telling that he doesn't try to shoehorn his way in, one-up Ichigo this one last time. He has grown over the last few months, fully understands that, while he is strong, he cannot actually keep up with Ichigo. Not many people can. When Ichigo tells him to stay back and keep Orihime safe, Ishida understands it as a mark of trust rather than condescension. Ishida listens because he trusts Ichigo in turn. He's no longer competing with Ichigo, he's working with him. It's a big, generous step from an incredibly isolated character, a subtle sign of growth that is very rarely, if ever, remarked upon. Also, and I say this in no way to cheapen the importance of Ishida's gesture or growth, I always had a feeling that he had a crush on Orihime. I think he would always go to Hueco Mundo to save a friend because he's a fundamentally brave, noble person, but there's that extra level of poignancy here. Ishida keeps things pretty close to the chest at the best of times, but there's just something about his tenderness for Orihime that feels like more. He makes choices here that aren't based on his usual cool logic and intellect, but rather emotion, and likely only because Orihime is involved. She asks him to carry her to the fight with Ichigo and ulquiorra, and he knows it's a bad idea. He knows that this is the most dangerous battle they have ever witnessed. They really aren't strong enough to keep pace, much less keep safe, and they will only be helpless bystanders to this conflict. And yet he complies. It's a bad idea. He knows it's a bad idea, but he does as she asks. Nothing specific comes from this relationship or dynamic, but I think about this page, this panel, all of the time. Once more, he's 15, and he's doing something that he knows he will regret for the rest of his life because he loves someone, and they asked. Finally, we have ulquiorra, the big bad himself. He is one icy dude, difficult to provoke and near impossible to make do what he does not want to do. He is largely disinterested in the people and things around him, and views practically everything with contempt for their arrogance, their lack of control, their foolishness, their heart. And in comes this kid who is all of that, loud and obnoxious and hilariously, obviously outclassed, who insists on getting in ulquiorra's way regardless. Because, and this is so fascinating to me narratively, ulquiorra really isn't the bad guy. That's Aizen. He's the one that's been ruining everyone's lives for the last 300 chapters, and I hate him, and it gives me joy knowing that not talking about him would make him angry. Ulquiorra, though, is just his lackey. He's not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest, not the oldest, not the most bloodthirsty. He's not even the guy that wants to fight Ichigo the most. Really, the only thing ulquiorra can claim is that he is an incredibly efficient machine. Fundamentally, he's just a guy collecting a paycheck because Aizen is the most reliable bet in this world, and likely the only person on this rock that has ever earned ulquiorra's respect. And yet, he is yet another foil to Ichigo, counter to him in all things. His personal philosophy is that of isolationism, of fatalism, of never being able to develop beyond what has explicitly been set out for you. Master of your fate, you are not. You are what you are born, and you can never become anything else. And when faced with a brash, kind, compassionate, self-empowered person like Ichigo, yeah, you could call them diametrically opposed. For all his cool control, ulquiorra becomes increasingly unraveled by our heroes. He would like to go about his day, but they keep insisting on getting in his way, spouting off about all of these noble virtues that he does not think exist. Each espada embodies one core aspect of death, of immortality, of vice. And while, yes, these are mostly just the 7 deadly sins with a few extra to round us out to 10, ulquiorra's core concept is nihilism. He cannot believe what he does not see, and he cannot respect the unbelievable. Genuinely, I love ulquiorra, I really do. He's such a nasty little monster, and he was my absolute favorite when I was a child, and yes, that says something about me. But as an adult, I just want to deck the guy. He's so awful. Every time he opens his mouth, he's just spewing some arrogant screed about how dumb everyone is for not ascribing to his philosophy. And when people don't agree with him, he gets aggressive. Sure, he's not throwing down like some of the other espada, but he gets in people's space. He threatens them. He verbally tears them apart, functionally throwing his weight around because he knows that if they try to call him on anything, he's strong enough to grind them into the dirt. One of the most important interactions Ulquiorra has is with Orihime, when he gives his iconic "What is a heart?" speech. Orihime's fundamental compassion is baffling to him. Her noble sacrifice is a waste because he sees all of the flaws in her plan. He constructed the trap that lured her in deeper. And so, when she starts proclaiming that she still believes in her friends, still feels bolstered by their love for her, when she announces that they care for each other so deeply that 6 hearts beat as one, he's incensed, incredulous, filled with contemptuous disbelief. "What is a heart?" he asks her. "Can it be seen if I rip open this chest of yours? If I crush your skull, will I find it in there?" Don't touch her like that. The heart, he tells her, is nonsense, and humans are all the more nonsensical for believing in it so deeply. And that makes sense. If his is a world of meaninglessness, of nothingness, he can't think of anything more irrational than fighting so hard for something that does not exist. Much better to give in, stand aside, surrender yourself to the misery. It's something Ulquiorra believes so strongly that he gets angry, deviating from his normal cool persona just to break Ichigo in a grand display of power. Because Ulquiorra still outclasses Ichigo in a real bad way. Every time they fight, and I mean every time, Ichigo basically dies. Granted, it's fairly common for Ichigo to be pretty torn up by the end of his battles, as he's a 15-year-old that goes from fist-fighting street punks to throwing down with death warriors. But Ichigo's utter failure to even approach Ulquiorra's standard is... well, I only say it's laughable because otherwise I'd cry. Ichigo is no stranger to facing supremely powerful enemies, most of whom greatly underestimate him. But Ulquiorra has his number, where Ichigo is still fumbling in the dark. "You're the leader of the Espada, right?" he says, almost as though he's convincing himself. "If I can just beat you, I can take Orihime and go home." And that's when we get the big reveal. No, he's not the strongest. He's not the leader. He's just some guy, 4th in the lineup, and yet he knows that Ichigo is not as strong as him. And then he proves it. In their final battle, it doesn't get better. Ulquiorra just punched a hole into Ichigo's chest, 30 minutes before? Ichigo has fought 2 battles, had the crap kicked out of him both times, been patched up, sprinted over here, and now is just going to do it all over again. This isn't like other fights where Ichigo can just muscle through it, white-knuckling his way to victory. There is no way he can hope to match Ulquiorra. Nothing is changing about his power level or his techniques or anything that can give him an upper edge. If he wants to live, he needs to run away. But as Ichigo states, it's not that he thinks he can win. It's that he has to. Although Ichigo enjoys the thrill of combat, he doesn't like hurting people. At this point, after all he's been through, all he wants now is to save Orihime, pack it up, and take all his friends home. He's tired of fighting. He just wants to leave. But Ulquiorra will never stand aside, just as Ichigo will never let his friends go, so fight they must. It is a scene we have watched unfold so many times before, but this time, the battle does not go well for him. Even on the scale of Ichigo always having a bad time, the battle does not go well for him. At first, we may be hopeful. Ichigo has learned a lot in the short span he spent in Hueco Mundo. And sure, I just said that nothing's changed for him, but, maybe something will. Maybe he can go toe-to-toe with one of the strongest arrancar ever. But then we see that, no. This is not some raw competition, 2 people giving it their all as we bite our nails over who will win. This is Ulquiorra tearing through the place with Ichigo as his wrecking ball. The battle is more akin to a massacre, Ichigo being battered again and again and again. Ulquiorra could turn away Ichigo's best attack with his bare hands in his normal form. But Ulquiorra has a point to prove now, as he releases forms first once, then in an unmatched display of power, twice. And when Ishida and Orihime catch up to them and reach the top of the dome of Las Noches, they see the worst. The dome of Las Noches. The glory of this fight, of all fights in Bleach, is that the stakes are real. Violence is a standard in this entire genre. It's a battle manga, after all. But here, there is no get-out-of-jail-free card. No one is going to come in and save them. There is no secret weakness to exploit. The power of friendship isn't going to slap a band-aid on everything so we can skip home. No matter how this fight goes, they will have to deal with what they've done, if they even make it to that point. Everything is earned in this story. Every development and new skill stems from blood and sweat and tears. And granted, this gets a little wibbly towards the end of the series, but here, it's in full effect. Unlike a lot of battle manga, it's not just them kicking around until the narrative decides someone gets a makeover and a new set of powers. They have to suffer, they have to work, they have to cut away their own weakness to grow that much more. Usually, it's euphoric. Sometimes, it's devastating. Although Ichigo gives it more than his very best, he loses. He's been defeated before, very badly sometimes. Very, very badly. But here, he loses. He dies, and everyone knows it. Not almost, not mostly, completely. We are forced, like Orihime, to stare at our friend and champion and see that there's nothing in his eyes. The horror of the moment is almost overwhelming, because we may have feared that he might not win, but we never thought that he could die. He's the main character, he's the hero. This can't happen to him. But Kubo is once more taking us by the face, making us stare at the corpse of Ichigo again and again and again, because to progress is to admit that he failed. This situation is whack. We just have to do our best to deal with it. Now Ishida and Orihime are left with the body of their friend, the strongest of them all, and the hell beast that killed him. They have no hope. That's laughably obvious, but still, Ishida tries to fight. He's completely outmatched, obviously, but he must fight to avenge his friend. And, if nothing else, sacrificing himself so that Orihime can escape is a noble way to die. Chivalrous to the last, our Ishida. Only, Orihime can't escape. Not only is she unable to get down from the dome of Las Noches on her own, she is in brutal shock at the death of her friend. She's devastated and she's trying to heal him, trying to bring him back like she has so many times now. She just did it an hour ago. This is her job. She is the healer. She is the support character. If she cannot fight, she will keep people safe, but she can't. Her powers aren't working. Because in a world where she cannot heal actively hostile energy, ulquiorra's is a malignant ocean above the sky. In an act of devastated desperation, she asks for help. A woman, a 15-year-old girl, begs her friend in unrequited love for protection, as she so often has. Orihime knows this won't do anything. It's an irrational plea in the face of calamity. But it's a plea that makes Ichigo wake up. Only, it's not Ichigo. It's much, much worse. Ichigo comes back as a monster, a hollow, a creature. This is the cost of winning. This is the pound of flesh, but it's not actually flesh that was lost. It was that stupid, nebulous, nonsensical concept, the heart. The jugulators. Part of what makes this fight hit so hard is that we've already been through all of this before. Ichigo already had his big epic battle with an ideologically opposed villain. He already overcame his inner doubts and defeated the odds. He already had victory in his grasp. And yet, the jugulators fight is something I've already referenced, several times actually. It is, at first glance, the culmination of Ichigo's arc in Hueco Mundo. And that's for good reason. Ichigo's fight with Grimmjow, all hail the king, is a good fight, a great fight, one of the best in the entire series. And I'm not just referencing this color spread that told me so, and also makes me sad for reasons that'll be apparent later. And it's just important. There are amazing action shots, emotional stakes, setups, payoffs, a tragic backstory, even a traumatic callback or two. And in many ways, the Jugulators fight is the perfect example of a battle manga conflict. A new, engaging, terrifying villain takes the stage, and although he is not the grand master behind the series' ills, there's something charismatic, exciting, and engaging about him. We want to see this conflict carried through. We want to see Ichigo fight this man and win. Grimmjow is evil and loving it, and boy do we want to see this man get his. And also get his, oh my gosh. This conflict between them isn't about honor, it isn't about ideology, it isn't even about saving Orihime. It's about hating the look in your enemy's eyes and wanting to beat it out of them. Once we win, that's really it. We shake the dust off our shoulders, grab our friends, and go home. Except, there's that sense of danger and loss that is now so characteristic to Bleach. Even as Ichigo is winning, even as we are swept up in the excitement of the moment, Kubo takes great pains to point out several times that Ichigo is slipping. Hollow Ichigo told him that he had a killer instinct, but it's only in this fight that he fully acknowledges, but also accepts it. Only when he is pushed to the brink, only when Grimmjow is gleefully using every dirty trick in the book, does Ichigo stop holding back. He gives into his bloodlust, he embraces his own thrill of the battle. Up to this point, all of the battles of import for Ichigo have him confront someone who views the world in fundamentally different ways, and usually it ends with Ichigo triumphing over them and proving that his way is correct. But here, that's not really the case. Grimmjow, as violent and abhorrent as he is, makes sense to Ichigo. You're not the only one who wants to win. You want to kill me because of how I look at you? I know how you feel. It's a change that everyone around them can sense. His spiritual pressure doesn't feel like a human's, it feels like an espada's. Seeing this conflict is said to strike primal fear in others because of how intense it is, and for Orihime standing there on the front row, it's a pretty rough ride. She's already seen someone else she loves turn into a hollow, and it didn't end very well. When she looks into Ichigo's eyes, she doesn't see her Ichigo. She sees something perilously like the villains keeping her in a cage. Worse yet, Ichigo can feel the fear coming from her. Every time he checks in with Orihime, every time he wrests his attention away from the thrilling bloodlust and adrenaline that is his fight with Grimmjow, his expression becomes more and more sad. This is the first time any of his allies have actually seen him hollowified. And Ichigo, in a moment of telling understatement, even describes himself as creepy and frightening, telling her that he'll end the battle, which is a promise of triumph, but also a latent reassurance that he won't make her suffer through this for very long. There is a tacit understanding that what he is doing, the things he says, are being borne witness by her. This is the first time, perhaps the only time, that the inner darkness of Ichigo is revealed so clearly to someone he cares about. The lesson Ichigo learns from this fight isn't the shonen-typical belief that friendship or love or inner strength overcomes any obstacle. It's that he's 15, and he has a taste for blood. But then the battle ends, and we can set that aside. We're safe now, we can have some jokes, the narrative easing back the pressure that it's been putting on our throats. Although there is that sense of loss, we can write it off as the loss of innocence found in the hero's journey. It's okay. Ichigo has learned something about himself, but now that he's aware, he can head it off. It's okay because this is an action-adventure story. It's okay, Ichigo has completed his arc. It's going to be okay. I don't have to tell you that by the time we catch up with ulquiorra, we already realize that it's not. We didn't complete anything. That was just a prelude to what's about to happen next. The reason I ultimately decided to turn back the pendulum and include the jugulators fight at a very late stage, this could have been finished weeks ago, in a discussion about the Lust chapters is that they are intrinsically linked. While both fights are completely competent on their own, the dramatic parallels cannot be denied. Ichigo's last fight with ulquiorra echoes many of the same beats and moments as his fight with Grimmjow, from specific scenes to comments made by the antagonists to how Ichigo treats a fallen enemy. They are informed by each other. But rather than be a progression or an escalation of what Ichigo has done with Grimmjow, it's this alarming, eerie inversion. When Ichigo speaks, it isn't the trash talk that we saw with Grimmjow, it's reassuring self-talk. It's okay, if I can see his sword, I'll be okay. When ulquiorra announces that Ichigo is outmatched, it's not some meet me outside, how about that? It's a cold statement of fact. Even the art begins to shift, reflecting this bleaker, more terrifying tone. Ulquiorra, although smaller in stature than Ichigo, is given more visual importance, power, and grandeur on the page. He perpetually stands on a higher plane than Ichigo, is shown as relentlessly stable against Ichigo's unstoppable force, and dominates the panel through close-ups, forcing Ichigo out of frame, and even literally transforming into a larger creature. At first glance, Grimmjow appears to be the more monstrous of the two, concentrated pile of sneers, bloodlust, and fangs that he is. And yet, ulquiorra is the more horrific of the two. There is something to be said, of course, for his cold restraint, but it's telling that a mere flick of the eyes is enough to silence or cow the people in a room with him. He is intimidating and frightening even in average moments, and when he finally drops the veneer of humanity, when he finally reveals just how terrible he is made demonic and grotesque, tapping into the primal fear of the audience. The Jugulators is a great battle in isolation, but it most importantly gives us context for why the Lust chapters are so bitterly unjust and cruel. We already had the perfect shonen battle. We already won, we already proved ourselves, we already had our emotional resolution. Ichigo may well have been taken to the brink, but he pulled himself back. He may have come to Hueco Mundo to fight Grimmjow and Aizen and all the rest, but ultimately, he has proved that although his heart is more ragged and bloodsick than any child's should ever be, it is still true. When Ichigo broke into the land of the Hollows, it wasn't to butcher his enemies. It was in service of a friend. Once he's done, we're supposed to get our happy ending. These are monsters. They will fight as monsters. This is the best, worst part of the Lust chapters. The absolute nadir of the entire story. It is ugly and monstrous and cruel. Here we are forced to reckon with the dark side of power, the dark side of Ichigo's soul. We have seen hints before, and we know that all people are destructive and bad when they are reduced to their basest instinct. But here, we see Ichigo fight with the power of all hell behind him. The fight is astonishing. We always knew Ichigo was a little too powerful for the world around him, but here it's a ghoulish inverse of what came before. No matter how austere, the balance is protected. Ichigo, or the thing he now is, beats ulquiorra. He destroys him, just as easily as ulquiorra did moments before. One blow. That's all it really takes. One blow, and ulquiorra is defeated. Only Ichigo's might is even more impossibly savage than what we saw before. Ulquiorra was vicious, trying to break Ichigo and make him say he surrendered, to prove that he was right. But here, Ichigo has no rationale. He has no sense of self. He's not doing this to any purpose, isn't trying to prove any point. He is just pure destruction. And what's worse, ulquiorra can heal himself on the spot. He can recover from losing an arm. He can heal his severed wing, can regrow half his body after Ichigo cuts him cleanly in half. And he still dies. He can fix it all, and Ichigo still kills him. But that's not enough. He is pure destruction. So he takes his sword to Ulquiorra's corpse. He mutilates his enemy. And when Ishida tries to call Ichigo back, tries to appeal to him and reclaim him from the savagery, Ichigo turns on his friend. This is the nightmare version of what Ichigo is and has done. He is exactly what his enemies told him he could be, what he himself feared. His balance is gone, his control is gone, it's just violence and aggression, that pervasive taste for blood. And it's made all the worse because here it's in the service of a friend. Orihime asked him for help, and here he is, giving it. Even in death, he is one who protects. There isn't an explanation for this, for why Ichigo becomes and does this. I'm sure everyone has their little pet theory years later, but we're never told outright why. It's a knife in the ribs, especially since the later arcs don't even bother to revisit the hollow Shinigami paradigm. We earned getting here, but we were never given the reward of explaining what happened next, though that is a discussion for another time. But at the same time, I don't really need an answer for something like this. Call it lazy, call it plot armor, call it me being a little too dazzled by something I love, but we have already ventured into disputed territory. Maybe there are no explanations for what really happened. From the moment Ichigo was trapped in the reality of having a hollow mask, he was in the experimental beta testing phase of being a vizard. A handful of people have done this and survived, and while they've been at it for 100 years or so, they are by no means experts on the subject. In this world in general, no one knows the limits of what they can do until they actually do it. And we've done a whole lot of crazy crap with zero precedent in the last 10 chapters. But it feels natural, organic progressions of things we've seen and things they've done. The groundwork was laid long ago, every instance here building on what came before. I believed it when Ichigo wrapped a long-distance attack around his sword to amp up his melee damage. I believed it when ulquiorra frickin' released twice. Are you kidding me? What Bankai BS is this? You don't get to do that. You're a hollow. You're a hollow. You told me you didn't get to do that, but you did it. Oh my gosh. And I believed it when Ichigo suddenly, inexplicably became a full hollow and operated on pure, unfettered instinct. If you justify it, if you weave it into your narrative, if you show that this is an evolution of everything you've been talking about, anything can happen, and only the consequences may follow. I said earlier, and have been alluding to this exact moment the entire essay, that in this moment, Ichigo has no balance. He has fought hard to find harmony within himself, and while Ichigo did, for a little while, manage to gain control, his hold was tenuous at best, lasting, what, a week? 10 days? Is that even worth counting when you're 15 and you have lives on the line? Now the balance has been disrupted, ripping the positive aspects from the fabric of his character. His instinct here is good. Protect, help his friend, save her from annihilation. And now that he doesn't have those pesky morals or rational doubts in the way, he can do that to its fullest extent. But it goes too far. He's gone from protection to needless chaos, from beating an army so he can go home, to mutilating a corpse because he can, and there seems to be no way to pull him back. He is now a monster, and he will fight as a monster. And then, on a fluke, it's over. A quirk of fate, Ulquiorra managing to heave his mangled, half-formed body up to deliver a final blow, to do just enough to crack Ichigo's mask, and it's over. Ichigo is returned to his normal state, and the worst 5 minutes of everyone's lives is finally done, but at what cost? We want to undo things. Run back the clock, even the score, make up for what has just happened, but it's too late. Some harm is irreparable. Some costs cannot be unpaid. Although Ulquiorra is on his feet and had the energy to rally, he's not going to survive this fight. Ichigo did permanent damage as a hollow, and while Ulquiorra wants to see this fight through, wants to finally prove who can win in this contest of wills, heart and heartless, vizard and arrancar, he can't. He's dying, and Ichigo cannot, will not claim this victory as his. Somehow, after all we've seen him say and do, after casually torturing Orihime, tormenting Ichigo, mutilating Ishida, after seeing him rail against the uselessness of life, Ulquiorra's death is incredibly sad. As Ichigo states, I didn't want it to be like this. I didn't want to win like this. Not now. Not this way. Not when Ichigo had to be a monster to do it. Not when Ulquiorra finally managed a shred of empathy. As the entire world fades to white, Ulquiorra has the first positive emotion of his entire hollowified existence. He is the embodiment of nihilism, the belief life is meaningless, and these soft, stupid, idealistic concepts like compassion and loyalty and bravery and affection are a foolish waste of time. As he says, if his eyes cannot see it, it does not exist. And it is only when his eyes are gone and his vision hazes out and he has to function solely on faith that he gets it. He understands what these children have been fighting for this entire time. He understands why they remained when faced with impossible odds. This is it, the moment of understanding, the Eliza gasp at the end of Hamilton, the epiphany that clinches his narrative. But here it does not bring reassurance. It doesn't bring victory, and it doesn't bring peace. This understanding is a knife in the chest because it only happens because he is lost. And to twist the knife even further, we are made to watch as Orihime, good, kind, compassionate Orihime, takes pity on this creature and tries to offer him a bit of comfort as he dies. And yet, it doesn't even work. She isn't even able to hold the hand of this poor, dying man as he realizes that everything he has done up to this point, everything he's believed, everything he has sacrificed, was for nothing. This is the cost Ulquiorra must pay to feel a heart, and it's a cost Kubo is fully aware of as he takes the time to dedicate an opening poem, a chapter title, and a color spread to the concept. As the audience, we must watch as this spoiled victory unfolds. We cannot look away. We might even want to stop, because yet again, to proceed is to admit that Ichigo failed. Not to win the battle, but to tame the monster inside that he swore to defeat. Orihime failed because she caused those she cared about, even the monsters, to hurt. Ishida failed because he could not compete with the beings around him, could not balance out his foil, could not make himself relevant in this story about Shinigami and hollows. And Ulquiorra failed because, well, look at him. Everything he is has turned to dust. There are nastier, more ruthless enemies to vanquish, more allies that are lost, more discoveries and sacrifices that prove to be even more sad. But this is the battle we remember. This is the culmination of everything that came before. This is the mark that remains indelible on our hearts. Or at least, it is for mine. You're allowed your own thoughts, of course, but this is my pitch as to why I think they're the best. Why I think the Lust chapters have never quite left me the same. Goodbye, halcyon days. Bleach never really reached these heights after Ichigo, Orihime, Ishida, and Ulquiorra leave the Dome of Las Noches, literally descending from their narrative heights. Like I said earlier, Kubo never even addressed everything that happened in this part of the story, nor did Bleach ever come back to its reigning theme of balance. Newer, flashier ideas were introduced that are less developed and don't exactly come together as a whole. But again, that's a different gripe for a different time. I don't know why Bleach faded so badly after the Lust chapters. It could be the natural way of things. Stories naturally degrading after running continuously for 15 years, Kubo getting tired and having to draw from an increasingly depleted well. But given the extent with which manga magazines are willing to influence their creators in order to accomplish the magazine's goals instead of the stories, considering the tight grip Bleach had on the market, considering how neatly, if incompletely, the story finishes after the arrancar arc, only for Kubo to spend the next 50 chapters trying to backpedal that conclusion, and then wrap it up way too quickly in a final arc that has somehow too long and yet too short to deal with everything brought up, considering this is an industry defined by crunch and grind and working non-stop until you hospitalize yourself because other people don't get to live this dream. Be grateful for what you have. I don't know. I just think it's weird that the story has this one amazing section and then suddenly pivots halfway through to become an increasingly shallow execution of the storylines. Some of the storylines that were introduced. It's devastating to think that maybe Bleach was just too good in these chapters, flaws and all, that it peaked in a way that it can never truly cash out on. But at the same time, I would never give them up. I will always choose a handful of chapters that set my soul on fire that are never satisfactorily resolved, instead of a few hundred tepidly okay chapters that never said anything very interesting at all. Bleach is complicated and flawed. We haven't even skimmed the list of things I have gripes and complaints about, but that doesn't mean I will ever abandon it. I've loved Bleach for the last 15 years of my life, and sometimes I forget about it. Sometimes I get grumpy about it. Sometimes I actually manage to trick myself into thinking, maybe it's not carved upon my bones. That was just a childhood thing. But I always come back to it because I love Bleach. I love it for all these reasons and more, and I love the Lust chapters best of all. I guess what I'm trying to say is thank you. Thank you, Kubo, for these halcyon days.